So it's been about 1 month since I uploaded my last YouTube video, so I kind of wanted to give an update about what I've been up to and where I am right now. So if you watched my last videos, maybe you know that I'm actually in Rio. I've been here for the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to be here for almost another 2 months. And on the side, it's kind of a working and also vacation trip. And one of the things I've been working on here is actually how to use Svelte and SvelteKit to build apps. So traditionally, I'm more of a Next.js and React app developer, but this time I've tried something new, and I kind of wanted to give a video about how to make the transition, all the things you have to learn from someone who's just did it. So while I've been here, I've been building this word learning app, I guess you can call it, since no one here really speaks English. So I've been trying to learn Portuguese, and I struggle with memorizing all these words. So I have this basic app where you can learn new words and you can create new words. So in here, you can just go to the bottom and add a new word if you want to. And so, for example, I have dangerous in English is perigoso in Portuguese. And then you can set like the state of the word and whether you want to keep learning it or refresh it or whether it's mastered. And then in the learning section, you can just, the word comes up and you have to answer, give the translation. This one, to be honest, I've forgotten it, but this one is like presunto, for example, and you can check and then it gives you like correct if you got it correct. And you can add different kinds of words. So for now, I have basically non-verbs, which are like ham. And I have verbs which are to sleep or to be. So that's kind of the basic of the app, but I actually learned a lot on how to use SvelteKit coming from a Next.js background. And I'm going to share with you how to make that transition now. All right, so let's quickly look at the things I'm going to cover in the video so that I don't waste your time in case you're not interested. And I have this little Notion page that I'm going to use to basically summarize the agenda. And I want to compare basically React and Next.js with Svelte and SvelteKit, which are the front-end frameworks and their full-stack frameworks that you can use together. So we're first going to look at the actual component syntax. So what is the structure of a React component versus the structure of a Svelte component? Then we're going to look at like hooks. So in React, you have this use state hooks or you use effect hooks versus what it's called in Svelte, which are like runes. Then we're going to look at common operations. So for example, in React, you often loop through an array of objects, and then within that map function, you return a component. And in Svelte, you have these kind of compiler syntaxes. So you can use like hashtag if or hashtag each to kind of do the same thing, but it's more of a syntactic sugar. And then we're going to look more at the SvelteKit versus Next.js. So how do you actually load data from the servers? How do you post data to the servers using in Next.js server actions and in SvelteKit form actions? All right, so I'm going to make the assumption that most people know React and Next.js better than they do Svelte. That's why they're watching this video. So I'm going to quickly run over the React stuff and then take a bit more time with the Svelte stuff. So this is a Next.js project I have that declares a React component, and this should look familiar to you. You first have your import statements outside of the function call. Then within the function is the actual component you're going to return. And within there, you have like your state variables or any functions you want to declare to handle, for example, on submit handler, stuff like that. And then you return from the function with the actual HTML or JSX you want to display to the user. So that's kind of how it works in React. Hopefully that's familiar. In Svelte, it's a bit different. You have your import statements and your state functions and any other functions you want, you wrap those within a script statement. So here I have this script, then I have all the components I want to use or all the imports I want to use for this particular component, as well as any state variables. So for example, here I have a state variable and any functions that I want to handle submit, for example. Those are all wrapped within script, and then not inside a function call or anything, you just directly state what it is you want to return in terms of JSX and HTML, so that the user can see that. So it's a bit simpler on the Svelte side, I would say. You don't have to declare a function. You can just directly start returning JSX. And yeah, everything else is just kind of neatly in a script tag separated from the actual UI that the user is going to see. Okay, so let's move on to hooks versus runes. So in React, really quickly, you have use state, use effect, the kind of things that React likes to call hooks, which you can just import from React and then use them in your component to declare state or to synchronize with an external system in the case of effect. And you have a bunch of other ones, for example, use reference, which is actually not appreciated, and other stuff like that. All right, but so how do you do the same thing in Svelte? So actually, if you look at the docs pages, they have this section explaining what a rune is. And the literal definition is a letter or mark used as a mystical or magical symbol And that's kind of what it is, because this $sign here, you can see I use it as well, is what they call a rune. And the nice thing about it is it's just part of the language. The compiler will understand what it is without importing any specific function. So compared to React, where you have to import useState or useEffect, these runes are just part of the language. So you can just put $sign and then props, and you're going to get the props, or you can define props for this component. You can define state by just doing $sign state, and the Svelte compiler will do the rest of the work for you. So that's nice. I think Svelte definitely takes the lead in this one. I don't have to import anything before I can use a state variable. And it's not a function that returns the state variable as well as a function to update the state. State in Svelte is just a regular variable, and if you reassign it, the compiler will automatically update the DOM and reflect any changes you made because of that state variable. So yeah, definitely a win for Svelte in that regard. And if you're wondering about useEffect, that's also possible with just the rune called effect. And the effect rune pretty much does exactly the same thing as it does in React. A nice rune actually that Svelte has that I'm pretty sure React doesn't have anywhere is this bindable rune. And what it lets you do is actually communicate data from child to parent instead of always from parent to child. So in a React app and in a Svelte app, you can pass props from the parent to the child, but the data only flows in one direction. And what this bindable rune lets you do is actually create a relationship that goes in both directions. So the parent can give data to the child using the props, and if the child makes any changes to the props, it's going to notify the parent that it should update those changes as well. But the docs actually do warn us to not use it too often, so this isn't something you should do too often, but it can simplify your code if used sparingly and carefully. So again, I would say Svelte takes a little bit of an advantage here, since it has these built-in runes that you don't even have to import anything, and it also has this bindable rune which lets you do something that's just not even possible in React. And another nice feature that Svelte actually has are these template syntaxes. So you can see that in this actual Svelte component that I have here. Instead of mapping through data.words and then within there returning a component within the map function, you can just use these template syntaxes where you just wrap everything within an each statement, and then that word becomes available within the template syntax. So it's a bit simpler. It's like a static sugar for the map function, basically. I would guess that in the background it's using map. And then you just have these if syntaxes as well. So instead of in React where you would kind of manually type that with JavaScript, that's nice that they have these each, if, and else. And they have other ones, but I haven't found myself using those as much. So that's another nice benefit of Svelte. All right, so let's get into more of the juicy stuff. So more of the full stack development, Next.js from front end to the back end to the database, and compare how the two full stack frameworks compare in that aspect. So in React and Next.js, it's pretty simple. You usually have a page file that is a server component. So it only runs on the server, and therefore it has access directly to the database. So for example, here you see that I'm getting the ID from the parameters, and then using that ID, I select a profile for the database, and I pass that profile to any component that needs it that can then run on the client. So questionnaire could be a client component that then got the data from a server component. That's kind of the architecture in Next.js. And in Svelte, it's a bit more explicit. So you have two separate files which actually separate the client and the server. So if you look at the Next.js example, you need to know that Next.js components are server-side rendered by default and therefore won't be sent to the client. That's how it works in Next.js. And Svelte forces you to be a bit more deliberate about that. So any page will be a server and a client component by default, and if you want to make sure that it's only running on the server, you need to add this .server file extension. This file is only going to run on the server, and it's obvious by the file extension. And within that file, I have this load function, which is also something that is used by SvelteKit, and it essentially does the same thing. Because it only runs on the server, it has direct contact to the database. So here I can just get the database, select, in this case, words from it using some kind of condition, and also join another table, and then I just return those words. And then in the actual client component, you can get the data through props. Any data you get from the server is just going to be part of the prop, like any other prop you would pass to this component. So that's nice. And also the whole type safety of it is automatic. There are hidden folders that you don't see in a Svelte project that take care of the type annotation. So now when I get the data from the props, you can see that it's already annotated and it has, for example, words in it that contain a word and a verb conjugation. So that's how data loading works in Svelte versus how it works in Next.js. All right, so by now we've talked about declaring the components, what are their differences. We've talked about hooks versus runes. We've talked about template syntaxes and how to actually load data on both React and Svelte. And one thing, or the last thing we're missing, is actually how to post data. So in Next.js and in SvelteKit, they are both have the concept of an action. In Next.js, it's called a server action, and in SvelteKit, it's called a form action. And they're essentially the same concept with a bit of a different syntax. And they both help you, the developer, focus on developing instead of writing cumbersome code, basically. So if we remember what a server action is it's basically an endpoint that gets automatically created by the framework, and the form is going to pass that data to that endpoint so that you don't have to write the API endpoint yourself. And both in React and Next.js, or both in Next.js and SvelteKit, they have these functions. So for example, this is my Next.js project, and I can give this form an action, which is going to be the update profile action. So whenever a user submits this form, in the background, it's going to make a post request to find the corresponding API endpoint that's located in a separate file. For example, in this actions file I have in my Next.js project. And in here is where it's a server component or a server file. So here we actually again have a connection to the database where we can directly make changes to the database and then send that data back to the client, all without refreshing the page. That is basically the concept of a server action. And that's how it works in Next.js. So you have to define this action variable on the form and then also use this weird action hook to make it work. I've never really understood how it works. I just kind of copy and paste the code always and it works. And in SvelteKit, it's a little bit nicer, again, I would say. In SvelteKit, you don't have to use any kind of hook. You just have this form and you can specify an action, which is going to be an API endpoint. So for example, handle non-verb submit. And as long as in your server file, the one with the server extension, you have an action declared with the same name, for example, handle non-verb submit, the data will be sent to this API endpoint. So you just have to make sure that the action in the form match the action you define in your server file. And here, from here on out, it's basically the same thing. You're in the server, you need to validate your data, you need to make sure that you're not going to put a bad model into the database. So from here on out, SvelteKit and Next.js are very similar. You can get the form data and then make sure it exists, or use Zod to have like a better schema, and then make the updates to any databases you want. So here I'm getting the word from the DB, and then if it's correctly translated, I'm updating properties, for example, how many times it's consecutively been correct. And then I just return some information to the client. And all of this happens without a page refresh. All right, so that's kind of it for this video. We've covered most of the things I want to talk about. So let me know if this helps you start using Svelte and maybe makes you a little less afraid of using it, because it's very similar to what you're used to if you come from Next and React. So give it a shot, try something new. I think I'm going to keep using it since it's very similar, but just does a few things a little bit better, which makes your life as a developer a bit more enjoyable. Let me know if there's anything else you guys want to see from the channel. Maybe a vlog kind of style of what life is like in Rio. Let me know, and I'm open to ideas. Thanks for watching this video.